You've seen news headlines about the South China Sea. But here's what you haven't seen. Actual footage of a Chinese Coast Guard cutter slamming into its own Navy destroyer while chasing a Philippine vessel. In this video, we'll break down the collision frame by frame, trace the exact minutes when the US deployed 2 warships, and show China's official statements alongside the international backlash. If you want to understand how a few seconds at sea can shift power balances, keep watching. Before we move on, I will like you to subscribe to the channel and like the video. A Philippine resupply run with 35 fishing boats looked like routine coastal work. The mission, part of the government's Kadiwa initiative, had one clear purpose: ensure that ordinary fishermen could operate near Scarborough Shoal without harassment. Leading the group was the patrol vessel BRP Suluan, backed by the larger multi-role BRP Teresa Magbanua. Alongside them, the civilian MV Pamamalakaya carried supplies and personnel. The waters were calm enough, the formation steady, and the crews expected nothing more than a long day of escort duty. That changed when a white-hulled Chinese Coast Guard cutter, identified as 3104, appeared on the horizon. It closed the gap fast, its wake growing wider as it matched the Philippine vessel's course. Moments later, the gray shape of a PLA Navy destroyer, Guilin, emerged, running parallel at a distance too close for comfort. Both ships began matching Philippine speed and adjusting to their movements. Passing a beam, the cutter's crew positioned themselves so near that the hull markings were easy to read with the naked eye. The harassment began with subtle shifts. 3104 crossed the bow of the BRP Suluan at a sharp angle, forcing the Philippine helmsman to ease off speed. Guilin edged inward from the opposite flank, narrowing the corridor. Each time the Philippine ships corrected course, the Chinese units moved with them, maintaining pressure. Then the cutter swung back sharply, executing a blocking maneuver that put it directly in the Suluan's path. Crew members on 3104 could be seen dragging out a heavy fender, normally used to cushion pier landings, and securing it to the hull's side as if anticipating impact. When the gap narrowed to meters, the unexpected happened. The cutter, in a high-speed intercept of the Suluan, overshot its line. Its starboard bow veered toward the destroyer Guilin. Within seconds, metal scraped, and 3104's bow punched into Guilin's port side just ahead of the bridge. Both ships rocked from the contact, paint stripped, plates dented, and some fittings visibly sheared on the cutter's forward hull. Observers from the BRP Teresa Magbanua could see twisted metal near the waterline. Philippine officials later described the cutter as unseaworthy, pointing to the damage sustained in the strike. Commodore J. Tariella would later note that aggressive harassment in such tight quarters carries enormous risk. In waterways crowded with both civilian and military vessels, a single misjudgment can put even Allied ships in harm's way. Here, the cause was simple: navigating at speed within restricted space while trying to hem in another vessel. This was no minor scrape. It marked the first spark in a chain reaction that would bring actors far beyond these shoals into play. Because while the Philippine crews stayed the course with their civilian escort, word of the collision was already moving fast. And within days, the world's most powerful navy would be steaming toward Scarborough. Minutes after steel scraped against steel, the radio traffic took a surprising turn. Instead of pressing the advantage, the Philippine Coast Guard signaled an offer to assist the damaged Chinese cutter. The message was clear and formal: medical care if any crew were hurt, and immediate help if anyone had gone overboard in the collision. There was no sarcasm in the transmission. To outside observers, it looked like a moment of professional seamanship in waters usually charged with hostility. The offer hung in the air with no public reply from the Chinese side. Both cutters and destroyer maintained station, shadowing the Philippine formation. It was a strange moment. The same ships accused of dangerous harassment were now potential recipients of humanitarian aid from the crews they had just tried to block. In an area where every maneuver is political, even a safety protocol has diplomatic weight. The paradox was obvious: cooperation and confrontation playing out in the same few square nautical miles. Despite the near miss and damage, the BRP Suluan and BRP Teresa Magbanua did not break from their mission plan. They adjusted formation to keep the MV Pamamalakaya screened, as it continued toward fishing grounds. On deck, civilian crew loaded gear for distribution to fishermen already working the area. Above them, Chinese hull numbers stayed in view, pacing silently at a distance like an invisible boundary line. Every course correction and speed change drew a reaction from the Chinese side, but the Philippine convoy pressed on. Within 2 days, foreign hulls joined the picture, and this time they flew the U.S. flag. USS Higgins, a guided missile destroyer, and USS Cincinnati, a littoral combat ship, entered the South China Sea and moved to within 30 nautical miles of Scarborough Shoal. These were not random transits. They were part of a freedom of navigation operation, known in naval shorthand as a FONAP, designed to challenge claims Washington considers excessive under international law. A FONAP in contested waters is a deliberate act. The ship follows a route and conduct that treats the area as part of the high seas. It does not request permission from the coastal state claiming the waters, making the point that no such permission is required by law. In this case, the proximity to the shoal put the U.S. vessels squarely inside the zone Beijing considers under its jurisdiction, a position the U.S. rejects outright. The speed of the U.S. move was not accidental. Mutual defense arrangements with the Philippines meant Washington was already tracking the situation, and the cutter-destroyer collision was a ready-made opportunity to underscore its position. The Higgins and Cincinnati did more than send a signal to Beijing. They turned a maritime dispute over a cluster of fishing boats into a visible contest between two major military powers. And the Chinese response was not going to be quiet or slow. Beijing's account of the incident carried none of the restraint seen in Philippine radio transmissions. Hours after the USS Higgins and USS Cincinnati approached within 30 nautical miles of Scarborough Shoal, the PLA Southern Theater Command stated the destroyer had illegally entered territorial waters around Huangyan Island. In their narrative, this was not lawful passage. It was a breach of sovereignty and a direct challenge to China's control in those waters. Chinese state media amplified the claim, framing the U.S. presence as a deliberate provocation aimed at destabilizing the region. Washington's response was immediate and blunt. The Pentagon reiterated that U.S. warships operate wherever international law allows, and that the South China Sea remains a vital sea lane under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. By U.S. standards, the waters near Scarborough Shoal are part of the high seas, open for navigation by all nations. The PLA statement painted a completely different picture, telling domestic and international audiences that the Higgins had ignored warnings and entered waters under Chinese jurisdiction without consent. That contrast, two countries describing the same event in opposite terms, showed just how far apart their positions stood. The Chinese military's message carried a second layer. It cast the Higgins movement not only as a maritime trespass, but also as a disruption to peace and stability. By linking sovereignty with regional security, Beijing sent a signal to neighbors and partners that the U.S. was to blame for raising tensions. It was a familiar rhetorical move, but this time the timing, right after a Chinese cutter had collided with its own Navy destroyer, gave it sharper edges. Other capitals were watching closely. Officials in Japan voiced concern over what they called unsafe maneuvers and urged all parties to pause before another dangerous encounter occurred. Australia and New Zealand echoed the call for restraint, warning that actions at sea were now testing the boundaries of existing maritime agreements. Statements from these countries avoided direct accusations, but left little doubt about their alarm over the tactics being used. Analysts placed the events within a broader pattern. They pointed to China's gray zone activity, operations that stop short of open conflict but use constant pressure to wear down opponents. In these contested waters, that can mean surrounding target vessels, blocking their routes, or using high-powered water cannons to force course changes. None of these actions require a formal declaration, but their cumulative effect is significant. The near impact between a PLA Navy destroyer and other ships marked one of the most severe instances of this approach in years. For regional alliances, these seconds at sea carried weight far beyond the damage to a cutter's bow. Aggressive close contact maneuvers increase the risk of an incident that could draw in defense treaties. Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. reaffirmed that his country will defend its maritime rights. making it clear that pressure would not push Manila away from its claims. The encounter now stands as a case study in how a single collision can shift the strategic environment for an entire region. In contested waters, a single turn of the helm can shift more than just a ship's position. It can redraw boundaries in how nations see and respond to each other, changing the balance of regional security in hours. What began as close-quarter maneuvering can set alliances in motion and bring major fleets within reach of disputed shoals. If you want to track how these encounters shape the Indo-Pacific, stay tuned for future briefings. In the South China Sea, the difference between an ordinary patrol and an international incident is often measured in seconds, not miles.